The official narrative is a calculated distraction. While defense outlets publish missile briefings, the U.S. Navy has been forced to reset its entire framework amid a competition push. This is not a procedural update. It is a quiet admission that the conventional threat model is obsolete. The public is being shown faster missiles, while the actual vector of attack has already bypassed them. The decisive vector is not kinetic. It is silence. CSIS reports detail the systemic vulnerability of the global communications backbone, the subsea network of fiber optic cables. This is the central nervous system of finance, logistics, and command and control. Unlike a missile launch, which is loud and attributable, severing these nodes is cheap, deniable, and inflicts a pure solvency crisis. This protocol is designed to create a blind Leviathan. A nation-state with unparalleled military hardware becomes a systemic liability the moment it is deafened and blinded. Its carrier groups become billion-dollar floating prisons, its satellites orbital debris. The kinetic cost to achieve this is near zero. The effect is the functional liquidation of a superpower's entire strategic asset portfolio. This triggers a mathematical re-evaluation of escalation. The launch-on warning threshold is no longer a response to incoming kinetic threats. It is lowered by the perception of terminal systemic weakness. A blinded power, unable to verify the state of its own assets or the status of the world, is cornered. The final deterrent is deployed not from a position of strength, but as the only remaining response to a silent, paralyzing attack on its very solvency. A state is an economic entity before it is a military one. When its liabilities exceed its assets, it faces a solvency crisis. This isn't ideology. It's a balance sheet problem. The primary motive for pivoting to asymmetric warfare is not aggression, but the mathematical avoidance of systemic bankruptcy. The war in Ukraine is the accelerant for Russia's solvency crisis. CSIS analysis confirms the conflict is a severe domestic liability, eroding political capital with every kinetic exchange. The cost to deploy and lose a T-90 tank is no longer just a line item in a defense budget. It is a withdrawal from a dwindling account of public support. This is a mathematical certainty. When conventional victory becomes financially and politically insolvent, the protocol must change. This forced pivot to asymmetry is already underway. Russia is not just using, but marketing its AI-enabled KUB-22E attack drone for export per United 24 media. This is economic warfare. The objective is to proliferate cheap, effective vectors that make conventional dominance obsolete. You cannot project power with a $13 billion aircraft carrier when the adversary's kill chain is activated by a $50,000 autonomous asset. The math no longer works. The attack surface is total. As documented by Euromaidan Press, Moscow's attempts to equate the Crimea annexation with the Greenland crisis are a legal vector, a deliberate attack on the framework of international law. Domestically, public opinion shifts, such as those observed in the United States, create internal fractures that become strategic liabilities for an opponent. Weakness at home negates strength abroad. A nation fighting itself cannot win a zero-sum game. This culminates in the solvency crisis. The state is bleeding political capital, unable to afford the kinetic cost of maintaining its superpower status. This structural weakness forces a reevaluation of its ultimate deterrence. The threshold for a launch-on warning protocol is lowered, but the warning is no longer an incoming ICBM. It is the state's own proximity to systemic collapse. It's a last-ditch effort to rebalance a bankrupt system with a high-yield asset. The math is unforgiving. A $5 million main battle tank, a pillar of conventional dominance, is now a kinetic liability. It can be hunted and neutralized by a $500 FPV drone. Analysts at the Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI, have documented this brutal inversion of cost. This is not warfare. It is a solvency crisis played out with explosives, where legacy assets are systemically liquidated at a 10,000 to 1 cost disadvantage. This phenomenon is termed the democratization of violence. The barrier to entry for delivering lethal force has collapsed. What once required a nation-state's industrial base and supply chains now requires a credit card and an internet connection. State actors are accelerating this protocol. Russia is already marketing AI-enabled attack drones like the KUB-22E for global export. The ability to project kinetic force is no longer a monopoly. For a superpower, every engagement becomes a losing economic exchange. The kinetic cost curve has inverted. Every billion spent on conventional platforms yields a diminishing return against a swarm of low-cost, asymmetric threats. This forces a systemic reevaluation. If you cannot win the attrition battle on a financial level, the mathematical certainty is that the strategic calculus must shift. The system is forced to consider lowering the threshold for unconventional, high-yield deterrence, not as an act of aggression, but as a desperate measure to restore solvency. Geopolitical friction is not random. It is a managed portfolio of proxy laboratories. These gray zones, the unstable peripheries, are not the crisis itself. They are the staging grounds where low-cost asymmetric vectors are tested, refined, and prepared for export. The objective is to engineer a blueprint for systemic erosion. The first vector is kinetic. Reports confirm Russia is now exporting AI-enabled attack drones like the KUB-22E. This is not merely an arms sale. It is the calculated proliferation of a low-cost attrition model perfected in one proxy war and now available globally. The goal is to raise the kinetic cost of a superpower's conventional force projection to an unsustainable level. The second vector is legal. According to Euromaidan Press, Moscow now deploys lawfare that compares its illegal annexation of Crimea to disputes over Greenland. This is a deliberate injection of ambiguity into the international legal framework. It is a non-kinetic weapon designed to paralyze institutional response, transforming international law from a shield into a liability. The third and most critical vector is domestic. Internal inflection points, as documented by Al Jazeera regarding sentiment towards federal agencies, are the ultimate target. These proxy laboratories test which narratives most efficiently degrade social cohesion. The objective is to create a domestic solvency crisis, where the state cannot afford the political or economic capital to enforce its own policies. The inevitable result is a strategic reset, forced by mathematics. The U.S. Navy's recent missile briefing reset, noted by Aviation Week, is not a sign of strength. It is a symptom of systemic pressure. As RUSI analysts note, when conventional dominance becomes economically insolvent against a swarm of asymmetric attacks, the escalation calculus is inverted. The launch-on-warning threshold for high-yield deterrence is no longer a function of enemy aggression, but a function of internal systemic weakness. The launch-on-warning protocol is the central nervous system of nuclear deterrence. As documented by analysts at CSIS, the doctrine is not complex. Upon detection of an incoming enemy launch, a nation launches its own retaliatory strike before the inbound warheads can impact and destroy its arsenal. This is a mathematical calculation designed to guarantee mutually assured destruction. It is also a systemic liability. This protocol is now the primary target. The fog of digital war is not about kinetic engagement. It is a direct assault on the verification process. An adversary no longer needs to build a multi-billion-dollar ICBM. They can achieve the same result with a cheap, asymmetric cyber vector designed to blind early warning radar and corrupt satellite data feeds. The commander is now facing a solvency crisis in real time. The data is compromised. Is the threat real, or is it a digital phantom? To wait for confirmation is to risk the complete liquidation of your nation's strategic assets if the attack is real. The systems designed to provide certainty are now the source of fatal ambiguity. This forces a mathematical reevaluation. The perceived cost of inaction, total annihilation, becomes infinite. The risk of launching on false data, while catastrophic, becomes the only logical choice in a protocol designed for a pre-digital age. The adversary has not fired a shot, but by exploiting the system's own logic, has forced the commander's hand. Fear becomes the trigger. The pivot from conventional deterrence to a launch-on-warning posture is not exclusive to nuclear strategy. As asymmetric vectors erode a superpower's economic and military solvency, a new trigger is being calibrated. CSIS analysis confirms that the cost-per-kill ratio for legacy platforms is now untenable against swarms of cheap autonomous assets. This is not a failure of strategy. It is a mathematical certainty. The calibration event will not be a kinetic strike on a military asset. That invites a symmetrical response. The target will be a systemic dependency with zero kinetic value but infinite economic liability. This is a test of attribution and response protocols under conditions of systemic duress, exacerbated by domestic inflection points that degrade national cohesion, as documented by Al Jazeera. Analysts at RUSI note the proliferation of export-grade AI-enabled drones, such as the KUB-22E platform, provides plausible deniability to any state or non-state actor. While the U.S. Navy resets missile briefings to address peer competition, the true vector bypasses traditional carrier groups entirely. The blueprint is simple. Trigger a liquidity crisis through a non-attributable infrastructure failure. Within 12 months, expect a coordinated signal loss event targeting a primary subsea fiber optic cable landing station, such as the Maria or AE Connect 1 trunk lines. The event will be attributed to a seismic event or trawler accident, but it will be a deliberate attribution impossible calibration shot. The objective is not destruction, but to force an admission of strategic insolvency.